Nayeri, for that wonderful introduction, and thank you all for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here, especially on such an important day, in such an important context. It's such a pleasure to talk to you girls, and I guess to see what kind of women we have coming up in the world. I am really heartened by what I've seen here at the school and what I've heard from your classmates as we prepared for today. Today I want to talk to you about a topic that's actually really important for intersectionality, and that is empathy. You guys have talked a lot about empathy before, I think, about how you can, try to understand another person's experience when they're different from you in a number of different ways. So I've written a few words which I will read to you, and they're about a particular way to have empathy, which has to do with the language that we use. Something's happening with this microphone, and it's really weird every time I breathe. Okay. There. I think this is good. Is it? Okay. All right. So, language matters. In troubled times, people talk about empathy. They want more of it, and they want to use it to make sense of things. They write think pieces about it, accuse each other of not having enough. It becomes something aspirational. At such times, people drag out stories of unusual empathy, and they marvel at this newfound superpower, like reading minds. When you're studying to be a fiction writer, though, empathy is a given, a necessary but insufficient skill, like reading. The job of the fiction writer is to empathize so much with another person, a character, that for a while the writer becomes the character, able to perfectly embody them, to offer their point of view in their own voice. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. This begins with voice, with language, and with individual words. It bothers me when people mistake empathy for the passive state of having sympathetic emotions, or even miming sympathy. Empathy is very different. It's an active daily practice. It's an act of becoming, of learning a voice. That's why the building blocks of empathy are words. That's why in MFA programs, the practical day-to-day work is about how to choose each and every word one by one, and how to put each word on trial for its life. Let me tell you a story. In Farsi, there's a word to describe the most wretched among us. The word is avare. It means straggler or wanderer. But the tone is one of pity and dread. You do not want to become an avare. In 1988, when I was 9, and my mother, younger brother, and I were refugees, living in camps in Dubai and Italy, I heard the adults whispering this word to each other when they were feeling hopeless. They never used the word in front of us children because it might frighten us. The word had weight. I heard it thrown around in love songs, like, say, without you I would be avare, and in fights, you made me a damn avare. In the refugee hostels, my brother and I began hearing English words. Naturally, we wanted to know the words for us and our identity. We learned refugee, asylum seeker, immigrant, even displaced person or exile. We also learned the word that most closely resembled avare, nomad. A nomad was a person who moved around, who didn't have a fixed home. A nomad made a space for herself where she was, and she had wiles. She knew how to quickly seem a part of a place, to find her food, her work, her community. A nomad didn't assume welcome. She was always earning it. I like the word nomad because it seemed to have agency. It felt like one single step up. And I was too young to truly understand avare. But my mother hated the word nomad. She was afraid of it. Once in the 11th grade, I was deep into my Harvard acceptance campaign. I was loaded down to AP classes and bruised by hours of sport. And one of my classmates called me ruthless. I think he didn't know what it meant. And perhaps he meant it as a compliment. But when I went home in tears, when I told my mother, her eyes welled up too. We do have a home, she said. This is our home. I was confused. I tried to clarify. I said, ruthless. said, not that. Ruthless is something else. It means cruel. Someone who's very driven to the point of meanness. Oh, she said, well, that's not so bad. It was rootless that was the frightening one for her, the one that we dreaded, whose implications could last our entire lifetimes. Over the years, I learned the subtle difference between immigrant, nomad, exile, displaced person, expat, refugee, and all the rest. As a teenager, I stopped using the shameful ones. I called myself a naturalized American, and I left it at that. Then I arrived at Princeton, a place I believed was a great equalizer. But I soon learned there were two distinct communities, even within our great university, and each had its own coded words. Work study meant poor. International meant stinking rich. This was the days before international students were offered any financial aid. Legacy meant offspring of alumni. I didn't question these words then. I didn't say, if study is hard work enough, shouldn't it be so for every student, not just some? I didn't say, no person is another's legacy, or else everyone is. I didn't say most of the space that you call international is in fact poorer than America. The altered meaning of these words within our university gates revealed much about the way we lived and thought. And we accepted that kind of thinking. A few months ago, I was asked to visit a book club run by a group of mothers from the American School of London, where I teach an American literature course. They had just read my novel, Refuge, about a Western-educated woman much like me and her father who stayed in Isfahan, and the culture gap that opens up between them as she grows more and more American, then European. Though my protagonist is a comfortable academic with a home and a secure life, the story returns again and again to the memories of her refugee days, to the night she spent in a homeless shelter. She carries the burden of her avare days into prosperous adulthood, and she toils and she suffers. She can't go anywhere without her backpack of vital possessions, her passports and her credentials and her work. Because what if she's gone? What if while she's gone, the world changes and she is lost again? The book club was full of educated women, women who wanted to empathize. They had read the book and they'd taken it to heart. One couldn't hope for a smarter, more engaged readership. As a rule, the mothers at the American school have impressive college degrees. They're open-minded, progressive, socially informed, and engaged. They also have a lot of money, and their children have been raised with comforts and resources and curated adventures. They consume the best of this planet's resources, attend class in style, the latest technology tucked away in their backpacks. Their teachers have attended top universities. The only refugee they know is the one teaching them immigrant fiction disguised as American lit. And if we're talking about words, isn't that the most honest labeling of the literature of an immigrant nation? And yet, half an hour into the book club, one well-meaning mother said the thing that I had been dreading since the conversation turned to the universality and humanness of my protagonist's experience. How easy it was to relate to her. The mother said, I felt so much empathy, because this is the life our children live. They're exiles, aren't they? They've grown up as global nomads. I admit this made me angry. Not just the casual way she made the story about herself, or the way she equated her children's enviable experiences with those of refugees, but I was angry with the appropriation of that word that I had come to fear and respect. I was a nomad out of necessity, then later out of habit and trauma. So, I launched into a spicy little speech. I told them the story of the last time I heard the word nomad. I was visiting a charity in London called Women for Refugee Women, a small organization that provides social and educational services to asylum seekers and refugees and illegal immigrants, women who come mostly from sub-Saharan Africa. These women have left everything behind, sometimes even their children. Some are trafficked, raped, prostituted, many illegal, vagrant, without hope or family or welcome. Some have endured FGM. Some have been going from basement to basement, couch to couch, for 2 decades. The asylum rejections piling as their years slip away. There isn't enough evidence, the Home Office keeps saying, to call you a refugee. But when you're running for your life, one of the women told me, do you stop and say, wait a second, I should take some evidence along? The first day I visited, the women sat around a long table in their worn cardigans and bright mismatched jackets, having taken care with their hair, with their accessories. I was hypnotized by the rainbow of purses, all big and bright and fat with necessities, all carrying secrets. They reminded me of my own stuffed backpack, this refugee habit that followed me through college and the working world. To this day, I told the women at the book club, I carry all of my passports and a snack and breath mints and my laptop everywhere I go, afraid of the day I will be displaced again. When I walk around the American School of London, the first thing I notice is backpacks discarded in the halls, open, their owners off somewhere having a chat, confident that when they return, their items will be there. And even if one day a bag goes missing, everything is easily replaced. Those items are not repositories of their identity. Their identity is safe. The displaced women in that charity called themselves nomads. When they wanted to be whimsical and avoid legal designations they had been given, like illegal or asylum seeker or refugee. They used the word casually to disguise the many wounds they had suffered because of it. Really, the word frightens them as much as it frightened my mother. They live each day in the fear of Jarl's Wood, the infamous detention center where many have been held for weeks or months with no purpose. Eventually, most Jarl's Wood's inmates are released back into English society. They're not society exactly, because when you are barred from work, you become a part of a different society, a dark economy that thrives underground. Many work as unpaid childcare, sleeping on mattresses in the corner of a room, asked to wander the streets if overnight guests arrive, vulnerable to nighttime visits from the men who employ them. They are called nannies, another perversion of language. A few weeks after that book club, I visited a refugee camp in Greece. It was a low hardship camp, a twisting of words to satisfy donors. What they meant was that the camp wasn't Moria in Lesbos, which I'm sure you've heard about. It wasn't the hell of the islands. It wasn't animal squalor, open sores, blankets on wet soil, gang fights in the night within inches of the faces of children. Here's what I remember most. A 9-year-old boy in the schoolroom casually chatting me up in Farsi. What's your card? He said. I have a friend who left. He got a German card. Did he? I said. Yes, said the boy, going on about football and winter in Greece and his new teacher. He has a Greek card now. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, he has a Greek card now. That's why he's teaching us. What's your card? To this child traveler, the world was made up of cards of different values, and each card represented the worth of its own. At ASL, sometimes my students lose their IDs. They lose their phones, their bank cards, and so do I. I can tell you're American or French, said the boy, before we said goodbye. He pointed to my phone. You keep your bank card on the back of your phone like it doesn't matter. Already this little boy knew so much about the world and its inhabitants. He knew so much about being a nomad. Our children aren't global nomads, I said to the mother in the book club. They're the elite of the world, groomed to navigate many cultures, confident in the knowledge that their passports will take them anywhere. They can live anywhere they choose for the rest of their lives, precisely because they are so well-rooted. It is wasteful to pity them. Yes, they suffer as every human does, and we should offer love and empathy without recasting their stories or making false equivalencies in order to make their struggles seem more urgent than they are. Let's not unknowingly rob another person of their own specific experience by broadening the definition of words. Let's not misuse those words to imply that everyone needs the same share of our mental space, our attention, or our sympathy. It's important to step aside sometimes. In doing so, we make room for another person, one who may have nothing left but their identity. That's what empathy is, honoring that identity, knowing the right words, not being careless or greedy with them. Empathy isn't trying to jam our feet into other people's shoes. It's learning their sound, their language, word by word. I've taught writing at universities and high schools, to corporations and in private classes for years. I always begin with a lesson on words. Words have meanings, and every single word matters. I tell them, we're going to spend a lot of time relearning words we think that we know. Sometimes my students roll their eyes, and then I tell a story, because many of them have lofty dreams of being writers. They seem a little bit disappointed in me for spending any time teaching. Where's the glamour of my writing life, they seem to say. So I tell them the story that came to me by way of Annie Dillard. A well-known writer got collared by a university student who asked, "Do you think I could be a writer?" Well, the writer said, "I don't know. Do you like sentences?" The writer could see the student's amazement. "Do I like sentences? I'm 20 years old. Do I like sentences?" If he had liked sentences, Dillard wrote, he could begin like a joyful painter that I know. I asked him how he came to be a painter, and he said, "I like the smell of paint." My students like this story because it makes the steps simple and clear. Play with the paint till you know what to do with it. Play with the words, then the phrases, then the sentences, till you know what to do with them. And it is true. You can become a writer just by doing that. And more importantly, you can understand people just by doing that, listening to the individual words. The other day, I watched a fascinating little train wreck on Twitter. A well-meaning white man trying to relate to a tweet by Dr. Roxane Gay accidentally switched out her phrase, "women of color," with the phrase, "colored women." Gay reposted his tweet with the question, "Colored women?" The responses were, of course, angry. He tried again and again to explain that he was agreeing with her that it was a mistake. He clearly felt that he was being treated unfairly. And maybe he was, but he failed to understand why people were so angry with him. The switch was infuriating because this was someone masking themselves as an ally and a friend. But a friend who's been listening wouldn't make such a mistake in language. They would know the history and the reason for each acceptable and unacceptable phrase. A friend wouldn't accidentally call you colored, because they would know what it feels like to see a photo of a water fountain from the 50s and 60s that also says colored. Words can be stealthy weapons. I knew a man who used the word elegant to abuse every woman that ever took his arm, because elegant was masking the more truthful word, submissive. I had a student who used the phrase learning needs to shirk responsibility until one day I forced him to say, "I'm just not interested in this." I had another student who used the word universal to discredit authors of color. Now that we've read the race stuff, can we read some real literature now, something more universal? It was the words real and universal, these seemingly benign, unrelated words that this boy gave away that he didn't really care. For him, the only story worth telling was his own. So early in every course, I show my students George Orwell's iconic 1946 essay, Politics and the English Language. In the essay, Orwell argues that the English language is dying because people are using it to distract us from their lazy thinking by stringing together prefabricated phrases that sound smart but carry no meaning. They're being dishonest, and they don't really care much about conveying the truth to their readers. Now, you may be thinking, I'm pretty truthful with my words. My thoughts are original, and I say exactly what I'm thinking. And that may be true. You might say, just look at my history papers and my English papers. Well, let me ask you this. How do you decide if a paper is well written? Do you look for academic sounding words? Do you maybe have a list of such words somewhere? Have you borrowed your words? Did you suffer to understand each word that you wrote down as your own? It is in classrooms that each generation first tests out the art of lying. It's where we learn to bullshit. And we do it exactly like this. We test out words and constructions of words without understanding them. When we have no knowledge, we quickly enter the realm of prefabricated and mixed metaphor. The metaphor's purpose is to conjure a single image. Some of us jam many discordant images together, and that is artless. Its aim is only to obscure one's own lack of thinking while counting on the listener or the reader to have thought even less, and to remember nothing later. This is easy if one says nothing precise, offers no fresh images to retain. Every time I start a class, I find that many of my students have been taught in high school to make their prose sound academic. Teachers have actually used the phrase, sound academic. What about actually being intellectually engaging? Well, that's hard, so instead, some choose to pepper their writing with meaningless, fatty, barren phrases. Phrases that you might have actually heard of and used. Phrases like, as a result of, or in addition to, and the importance of, and the significance of. Phrases that should be implied by the concrete ideas on your page. One student showed me a paper marked up by a teacher with these lifeless recycled phrases actually added in, and a note that said, use more formal transitions. No, these are not transitions. This is not the language of smart people. These phrases have two purposes, to lengthen your paper and to make your dull ideas seem profound. Instead of trying to add rigor to their thinking, they follow rules that some teacher told them were sacrosanct, and then they turn those rules into lazy habits. They say, don't use the first person. Why not? Why not use the first person? Don't start with a question. Why not? Questions are how we think. They say add qualifiers like for the most part, perhaps, according to some, so that you don't get caught saying things that may not be true, so that you don't get caught having an opinion. They say don't use a short word when a long one will do. Why settle for use when you have utilize, or better, make use of? No. Don't use one strong word, they say, when two weak ones will do. Why say instinct when you can say born instinct, or better yet, natural born instinct? Why say rush when you can say make his way rather hastily? Why choose one strong verb when you can just tack on the adverbs? By the way, all that stuff is wrong. Once I saw a student carrying around a list of academic phrases with him, prefabricated sets of words to improve his writing. What was this list for, do you think? Was it to help him think more deeply? To make him question his assumptions and get to a better argument? No. It was to make the writing easier. It was to fool the reader into thinking he thought harder than he actually was. This is lying, and it's taking the reader for a fool. A lie is a failure of empathy precisely for that reason. It dismisses the reader as unimportant, unintelligent. No convincing argument or good story has ever been written with prefabricated words. Orwell rails against the misuse of language because he wants us to know that lazy language leads to lazy thinking. It makes us incapable of thought, at least not original, nuanced, rigorous thought, the only kind that matters. Lazy thinking shuts out the possibility of true empathy, the kind of empathy that weighs each word, knowing that meaning changes with culture, with context, with each individual person. Language is supposed to bring us closer to the truth. In her 2006 essay, Close Reading, Francine Prose says that good writing means putting every word on trial for its life. I think I've repeated that phrase 100 times in every course that I've taught. Because if you don't do that as a writer, your work doesn't stand the scrutiny of a close read. Prose reminds us that as children, we naturally read closely because we haven't memorized the look of a word or a group of words. actually incapable of skimming. Only as we master reading do we begin to skim and skip and make assumptions, losing sight of the building blocks, the individual words on a page. It may seem like a lofty claim, but learning to write freshly and precisely can make you smarter, better people. Learning to read closely, word by word, can strengthen your ability to empathize. Then, you can speak to someone with an entirely different experience and understand and be understood. And that is empowering. On the other hand, when you use words to avoid taking a stance, when you refuse to say what you actually mean, then you become unreliable, entitled, and lazy. You learn to hedge and to obfuscate instead of being bold, showing weakness, trusting your own authentic voice. The most urgent, powerful words are often the simplest. On March 8th in London, the women in the refugee group lobbied Parliament for their rights as human beings with dignity, pride, and purpose. They told stories. They read poems. They sang a song. They said simple things. Set us free, they said. Detention is torture. Please, shut down Yarl's Wood. One of them began with a question. Perhaps she hadn't heard the rules of high school writing. Never start with a question. Am I not human? She asked. Tell me, am I not human? Around the same time, Reuters reported that the Austin bombings show no link to terrorism. What exactly did they think terrorism means? Perhaps they simply hadn't learned to be accountable for the meaning of their words. Language can lie. It can also show the truth. It can flood your mind with an image. It can tease. It can paralyze or encourage. It can corrupt thought. It can also sharpen it. Words have meanings, and you are responsible for those meanings. Don't use them to posture, to co-opt someone else's story, or to escape responsibility. Use them to learn the rhythms and nuances of other people's voices, to empathize so that you can really hear their actual stories. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was amazing.
Yeah, so,
Like, yeah, 10 minutes, so like 3 questions. Anyone have any questions?
Hi, I just want to say that was amazing. I wanted to ask that, like, the way of writing that you've been promoting, like, I, like, agree with that, but I wanted to know what you thought of, like, kind of, like, the way of writing that we're taught to do in order to be, like, successful, whereas, like for, like, the ACT or the SAT or, like, just for essays in general, like, the way that we're graded, like, how do we incorporate, like, what you said into that while still getting, like, good grades?
yeah, that's a very good excellent question. I don't know exactly how you're taught here. I know this is a very good progressive school, and so I imagine they do teach you to make sure that your ideas are strong and that every single word is doing something. I would suggest that you maybe test it out. Test out taking out all of those extra words, all those empty words, and your essay will get shorter, and then you fill it with more ideas and see what your teachers say. I have a feeling they'll actually like those essays better. I think that people, even in environments, now first of all I should say that the ACT and SAT and all those tests are broken. Like, they're all, they're basically, they're put together by bureaucrats. Often the learning is not fresh, it's from years and years ago, and they're not being graded by the people who are at the top of the game in terms of writing or anything, really. So you have to kind of live with that, live within that, but I know that even in those environments where people have kind of taken in that kind of teaching that isn't exactly the best sort of thinking, which I don't think is here actually, and when they read a fresh, out for every single word, that doesn't have those empty things, even a person who's used to that would think of that as a great essay. And in fact, they would think of it as maybe the most original essay they had read. Maybe they wouldn't be able to pinpoint for you why, and they would still continue to teach, oh, put as a result of or whatever, but they would never say to you, your essay isn't good because it doesn't have as a result of. They'd say, this essay makes me feel things and I don't know why. So I guess you could try to do that. Be smarter than the teachers, although the teachers here are amazingly smart. But I think be smarter than that exam person, because frankly, you can be. You can take on any voice, and as long as it's authentic and true and has ideas that are rigorous, people won't come after you for not having enough fluff.
Hello.
Hi.
Ooh.
I know, right? These microphones.
Heard. Wow. What is your favorite piece of writing that you think has embodied empathy?
Oh, wow. Well, I find the most empathetic works, the most beautiful works for me are fiction, or novels and short stories. And there are so many that have made me cry. I think one of the early ones that made me want to be a writer was this author called Kazuo Ishiguro. Have you heard of him? So he wrote, he won a big prize and became famous for Remains of the Day, in which he took on the voice of a butler. And this was made into a movie with Emma Thompson and that wonderful guy.
Anthony Hopkins.
Anthony Hopkins. Yeah, so, wow, I just called Anthony Hopkins that wonderful guy. But he wrote this book, and he's a fairly kind of educated, modern, Japanese English man, but he took on the voice of a butler from the 40s, kind of very, very old school, trained in the art of, I guess, butlering, and he did that voice convincingly, you did not think anyone else wrote that book. And so as a result, when he shared his, moral dilemmas, and he thought, and this book was about a moral dilemma, it was because he was in service to a Nazi sympathizer, but all he was doing was bringing out the coffee and stuff. So was he culpable? That is the central question of the story. But the thing is, we don't judge this character, we just go along for his journey, because the book is written with empathy. And the reason it's written with empathy is that all the words truly belong to this character. You don't suddenly stop and be like, oh wait, that's a place where Ishiguro messed up, and that's not how that guy would talk. That would be a failure of empathy. But he doesn't have that in this book. It's just entirely in this person's voice. And then another book, and actually the book that got me to truly love this writer and to think of him as a role model, was one called Never Let Me Go. And in this book, it's basically a story of a young girl in some dystopian society where, they clone people and take their organs for transplants. So it's kind of this dystopia fantasy sort of thing, but he embodies a teenage girl who has no control over her own medical future. And he embodies that voice so perfectly, and when she falls in love, when she loses someone. And he's not trying to be fancy with his writing, he's trying to be a teenage girl who's going to lose her body parts. That's what he's trying to do. He's not showing off, he's being the teenage girl. That's everything, right? And so that moves me, yeah.
Since we've been kind of taught to write and speak like this for so long, what can we do to help us stop doing that?
Read. So I would say read fiction, read good fiction, read nonfiction too, but read a lot of different kinds of voices, right? So when you, I think there's a point where I decided to be a writer, and the first thing that I did, right after I decided I actually was in business school at the time, and I decided I don't want to go into the business world, I want to be a writer. But the thing is, I've already kind of, done the grad school thing, and I completely broke from business school. I can't just go and enroll myself in another program again. So I said, how do I teach myself to be a writer? So I went on Amazon, and I went to the used books, and they're like $1 a piece. I ordered every single book in the last 50 years that had been a finalist for the Booker Prize, like hundreds of books, and they all came, like I was getting mail for a week, and I spent a year reading them. And I spent, like, I didn't read all of them, but I read about like 80 books that year. And I did nothing else. I had moved into a little remote village somewhere, and I literally had nothing else to do. But after 2 or 3, I started to see something. I started to see that certain sentences that sounded perfect in one book would have been absolutely a mess in another book. I saw that one writer might completely disrespect the voice of another writer, and that was fine, that they were embodying different voices, right? But one thing I started to see is that all of those words mattered to making the voice, right? And then after reading a bunch of those, I could actually go back and read some of my own writing and be like, oh my God, some of this is just garbage, So I think that the more that you read the kind of writing that you're striving to do, the best kind of the writing that you're striving to do, like your subconscious will pick up what is, good and authentic, etc. As for how you practice writing well, let's say if you've been given lists of words or taught in a different way, well, I say you ask yourself every time you put 2 words together or an image together or even one word in there, ask yourself, is this mine? Like, ask yourself this about phrases. Like, so for example, when you say, the consequence of such and such is that, you ask yourself, why can't I say this because this? Ask yourself, can I take 10 words and turn them into 2? Like, one of the things that, there was a writer, a friend of mine, who said, who kind of gave this little trick, where she said, you should give yourself a challenge. You know how the way, Microsoft Word pages look on a page, how sometimes there's like a line that's really short at the end of a paragraph, or like 2 lines at the top of the page, right? Give yourself a challenge to try to make those go away by cutting words without cutting actual meaning, And you'll be surprised how easy it is to cut words because you'll force yourself to take the time to take strings of words and turn them into a single word, or to take a verb and an adverb and turn it into just a verb that's better, And as you practice that, you'll suddenly just become better. It's a muscle, it really is. And you'll develop an ear for yourself. And then somebody can come to you later and be like, why don't you insert this phrase? And then you'll confidently say, because that phrase doesn't mean anything.
We have time for one more. I have one. Hi, right here. Hi. Yeah, sorry. So we spoke to you, Lily and I got the chance to speak to Dina at the beginning of the year in preparation for the conference. And I just wanted to see if you could speak a little bit about empathy. You kind of spoke on a man writing on behalf, or like writing as a female girl. Like, what is your take on empathy for writers who don't, or are writing characters of identities that they don't belong to?
This has been a really controversial and fascinating question in the writing world. I'm sure you guys have read a little bit about it. There's been writers who've been really taken to task for writing characters with identities that they don't have and, kind of appropriating, I suppose, that story. And I think that the reason that they get called out for that is because they didn't actually do the work of understanding that person. I think, like, why does Ishiguro not get called out for writing female protagonists? Because he does it so well that if you didn't see the author's, name on the front, you wouldn't know that it wasn't written by a woman. Like, he actually puts himself in the shoes of that person. I think for someone to write the story of someone with another identity, you have to do 10 times the work. I think when people say that, oh, well, this story should have been written by a woman of color, they don't mean that, people who, that white people could not write that story if they did it well. They mean that the bar is higher. You have to do so much more work to be believed if you don't have that identity than if you were raised for the last 30 years, you spent, your life living that experience. Then the story would just flow out of you and it would flow out true. Whereas if you haven't lived that story, you need to do so much more work to get yourself to that level so that you're telling that story truthfully. But if you do that, then great, you've created art, But be prepared, because if you don't do the work, right, you will get called out for it because you've taken another person's story and you haven't given it the work that it deserves. I think the perfect example of this is a novel called The Help. Yeah, no. So The Help is written by a white woman, right? And it's about, black maids in the 60s. But the problem is that novel does not have very much empathy at all. And I'll tell you, the reason that it doesn't have empathy is because it makes the white woman a hero. It makes her, it's the story about her career, about how she went and she got these stories out of these women and she gave them the gift of language, and then she went off to her job in New York City while they stayed behind. Does the book ask the question, what happened to those women staying behind after they've been identified in the racist, South? No, the girl went to her New York job. Also, it makes several horrible mistakes in language and in writing. For example, when it's trying to convey the accents of the black women, the accents are written out. So for example, there's misspellings to show you how these women talk, right? But the fact is, we all have accents, and none of us say words exactly as they're written, right? So, for example, I want to say but the white women in the book have their words written exactly correctly in terms of spelling. Well, for example, how does a white woman say the word sugar? I'm sorry, a southern white woman in the 60s, like from Jacksonville. How would they say the word sugar? Sugar, yeah. Well, there's no AH at the end of that word, right, in the book. But every time a black woman says a word that's pronounced differently, it is misspelled to represent her accent. That is a failure of empathy. You don't misspell words to show people's accents.
On that note, thank you so much. That was so we now have our workshops happening. So